Hi and welcome to the fifth video in this section. In this section, we're just going to look at an overview of the complete continuous integration pipeline. So we've kind of looked at the complete lifecycle when we looked at the AWS code pipeline service. So in that, what did we see? So the pipeline service can be used to take your source code. It can do a build, you can do a test, and you can even do a deployment of your code. And all of this is just triggered when you do a source code change. So when you make a source code change to, for example, let's say your GitHub repository, that will trigger a step in the AWS code pipeline. It will then trigger a build. The build could be from anywhere. You could trigger a test and you could trigger a deployment. Now, when it comes to the best practices in this complete pipeline, so we saw we had the source code, the build, the test, and the deployment. Now, what's very important is the testing phase. So ensure that you have unit tests which are defined for your code during the build process. Ensure that these tests are run. Also ensure to run integration tests. Since this is an automatic procedure or an automated procedure, you have to ensure that your tests are complete and run these tests during the pipeline process. Add notifications during the build process. So in case if the process fails, again, since this is an automatic procedure, you need to be notified. So ensure the correct people have been notified if there is a failure in the build process. If you're using AWS, you can use CloudWatch events along with Lambda to trigger these notifications. When the build is done, ensure that also the target environment is ready. So in AWS code pipeline, all of these environments are pre-built, but if you have a custom environment, so let's say you have a custom Docker container environment, then ensure that this environment is also ready and in place. So now we come to the concept of continuous deployment. So this is a step ahead of continuous integration. Now there's two key terms that we need to understand. So the first is continuous delivery and the other is continuous deployment. Now in continuous delivery, one key point is that the deployment process is manual. So let's say in an organization, you've done the code pipeline, you've done the build process and the testing process. In order to go ahead and deploy a code onto production, you might take prior authorization from your senior management. Only then can you actually deploy a code into production. So this deployment process is manual, and if you're following this sort of life cycle, then this is known as continuous delivery. But when you go on to continuous deployment, even the deployment process is automated. But in this entire life cycle, having this life cycle and maintaining this life cycle is a big challenge. Because of the amount of complexity that's involved, you're automating everything. So it's your build process, your testing process, and your deployment process. It's not easy. It is a challenge. And to try and detect places of failure during the entire pipeline is not easy. That's why you need to have the right tools in place. So ensure that if you're completely on AWS, use the AWS tools. Also, the right practices need to be in place. This is very important. The discipline of maintaining that automated lifecycle in continuous deployment is very important. Now let's go on to our next section, which is working with containers and microservices.